Guess what? You have the confidence inside of you already to achieve any musical goal that you want, including auditioning. So, how do you hone your confidence? Well, my friend, that is with the Confident Musician's Audition Guide. This guide is to get you from the practice room to on the stage for your auditions. We talk about everything, including planning your practice, that's in Chapter 1, working with accompanists in Chapter 3, getting into the zone at auditions, that's in Chapter 5. Chapter 2 is all about mental practice, setting up mock auditions, and basically everything about mock auditions in Chapter 4, and auditioners, which is scattered throughout the whole guide, and a load more. Seriously, this 43-page guide is my baby. I have poured my heart and soul into this to make sure it is exactly what you need for your auditions. So whether you are just about to go into your auditions, thinking about how you are going to start auditioning, or just curious about how auditioning works, this guide is for you. Let's be honest, the auditioning process might be a short process, but the effects of it can be life-changing. So invest in you, and let's make this the audition season of confidence. Let's get you auditioning with confidence. Check out the show notes for the link to your copy, or visit confidentmusicianing.com.
If you're working on the Mozart oboe concerto, you should listen to as many different recordings of that as you can. But you should also listen to, well, what other music was he working on at the time? Was he doing any piano concerti? Was he working, what symphonies was he doing? Was he working on any of the big operas?
Hey there, and welcome back to Confident Musicianing. In May, I sat down with Dr. Jason Worzbyt, an adjunct professor of bassoon at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. We talked about a ton of exciting things, including performing bassoon premieres, being in the right place at the right time to get opportunities, what younger musicians can do to prepare for auditions, from a PMEA adjudicator, staying mindful in performance, networking in music, and a whole bunch more. If you want to listen to the whole conversation, it is in the show notes to this episode, so make sure you go check that out. But let's be honest, sometimes listening to a longer podcast episode can be difficult. Maybe you're busy, or you're somewhere that you have to be, and just a 45-minute episode might be too much. So today, we are just taking a bite-sized piece from this 45-minute episode, and we are diving into one part of the interview, and that is preparing for auditions and staying mindful in a performance. Here's that clip. I think this ties right into our next, question, which is talking all about like you being an adjudicator for PMEA, that is Pennsylvania, and the question for you is, how are high school student auditioners compared to university level musicians when they audition? And can you give us maybe like 3 tips or pieces of advice for high school students preparing for any auditions that they have coming up?
Okay. I'll take the last one first.
Okay.
So so when you're like preparing for an audition, what do you want to do? Okay. You're going to get as many different answers for this as you are people that you would interview. So I'm going to give you, but on the other hand, I will tell you, as an ensemble director, I have heard probably thousands of auditions over the years for ensemble placement. So for me, if I was going to prioritize things, I really prioritize rhythm just above everything else.
Okay.
Is that because you can have the most beautiful sound, you can have impeccable intonation, you can have the most critical understanding of what you're playing, but if there's no rhythmic construct to it, mm-hmm. It's going to be hard for anyone to fit into a solo or an ensemble situation. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that, mm-hmm. because sound will always impact the listener first. There's nothing you can change about that. The type of sound or the sound that comes out of our instrument voice or whatever, that is always going to impact the listener first, and there's not much we can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
But soon after that, there's this element of time that really kind of pulls everything together. And so I listen a lot for rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say after that, I prioritize sound.
Okay.
The type of, and I think it's important to, your sound is going to change throughout your career in many respects, I think, because of the different teachers that you're going to study with. If you're a musician, you're changing equipment and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. When you go through different teachers, but your sound's going to change over time.
Yeah.
But I really think it's always important to be cultivating a sound. And mm-hmm. if I would cross over maybe to what you would ask me about a high school student, I'm reminded of a line that Bob Matchett once asked him. Bob Matchett teaches in the Seneca Valley School District. He's a terrific music educator, and I was watching him teach once, and he asked, this was a middle school band, mm-hmm. and he asked the middle school band, okay, how many of you have a favorite athlete? And they almost all did. Okay, how many of you have a favorite pop singer? And everyone else all did. And so then he looked at the trumpets. He goes, okay, trumpets, who's your favorite trumpet player? Mm. What's your favorite trumpet sound? And they couldn't answer. Mm-hmm. And so I think, being able to listen and cultivate the sound that you want is important, but that comes from listening to a lot of sound, a lot of different people,
Yeah.
My teacher, one of my teachers, Gene Corporon, always kind of, with all of his conducting students, had this hierarchy of being in time, being in tone, being in tune, and being in touch. Mm. So in time refers to rhythm, in tone refers to tone quality, and then the third one was playing in tune. And it's interesting that he would put playing in tone ahead of playing in tune. Mm. But here's the kicker. Most intonation problems, and I think you can almost attach this to anything that you do. Mm-hmm. I would even say vocal students as well. Most intonation issues are really tone production issues.
Ah, okay.
So invariably, when we play out of tune, it's usually a tone production issue. Either we're having reed difficulties, or the fingering isn't. Maybe there's a better fingering that we can use, or maybe there's the embouchure needs to be, whatever. But in most cases, they're tone production mm-hmm. issues. And so that's why cultivating a really good sound that's the second tip that I would give. And then I think the third tip is to listen a lot.
Okay.
If you're working on something, don't listen, and this is if you can find a recording, but if you can, don't listen to one, listen to 10. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know who to listen to, talk to your teacher.
Yeah.
And if you're working on, so like for instance, if you're working on the Mozart oboe concerto, you should listen to as many different recordings of that as you can. But you should also listen to, well, what other music was he working on at the time? Mm. Was he doing any piano concerti? Was he working, what symphonies was he doing? Was he working on any of the big operas? Mm-hmm. You should listen to that. Well, were there any other composers during that time that were also writing music for oboe? Well, then you go ahead and listen to that. There's a lot that can be gleaned, I think, from going multiple levels deeper mm-hmm. into what we are working on. And now it's easier than ever.
Yes.
Eleanor, I came from a generation where if I wanted to listen to something in depth, I would go up to the music library, I would check out an LP, mm-hmm. not a CD. CDs came a little bit later, and we had some, but it was mostly LPs, and then I had to go into the stacks, find the score, and now most, if not all, of the standard repertory is on sources like IMSLP or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
all out there, and with YouTube, I mean, it's the amount of information that is at a player's fingertips now is it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So it's easier than ever now to do that type of in-depth listening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm trying to think. This was I'm blanking at the. It might have been Jascha Heifetz, the very
Okay.
famous violin player. I
Mm-hmm.
think this is he that said this. Someone once asked him, when he goes out on stage, is he 100% prepared? And he goes, well, you really need to be about 200% prepared.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know,
Uh-huh.
that type of like bulletproof preparation.
Yeah,
So
100%.
and those are good. And you see, all of these are habits that if you start earlier, they're kind of easy to incorporate too.
Yeah, yeah. I think all three of those tips are so, so important, especially listening. Listening is something that I'm working on. I mean, just before we started recording this, I was listening to Mahler's First Symphony because I'm playing it. And I think listening is so extremely important with that as well. And also, one of the tips you were talking about, creating the tone. I know you as a bassoonist can probably relate to this, but something that I'm really focusing on is, taking a reed and creating the tone I want with the reed, not necessarily just taking what the reed gives me, right? Because every oboe reed, and I'm sure this is the same with bassoon, is different, and some of them cooperate more than others. But what I'm really focusing on is kind of just being like, I have this reed and I'm gonna make the sound that I want, and I'm not just gonna put up with what it gives me. So I think the all three of those tips, and the insight in terms of what high school level musicians can do is so, so important. 100%.
Well, and sometimes I think to a degree, if you show as a high school student, college student too,
Mm-hmm.
but as a high school student, if you show initiative to a teacher, most teachers will do anything for you. If you go, no, I'm serious about that. I mean, if you show, because I mean, that was my experience with I mean, I think about the teachers that I had in high school
Mm-hmm.
and middle school. I probably had two of the best. I mean, I really won the band director lottery. I mean, I had two just incredible musicians
Yeah.
and when they saw that I was really kind of taking a serious interest, they would do anything for me. They
Mm-hmm.
gave up between giving up extra time to help me with things and turning me on to recordings and stuff like that. Showing initiative to a teacher, I think, is just incredibly important. They'll do anything for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had experience with that, especially applying for university. I applied to 12 different schools in 3 different countries, and across the board, when I showed initiative, they got very excited to work
Well,
with
that's
me.
just it, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It actually, talking about like auditioning, things like that, I'd love to kind of just chat a bit about how you audition. What are like 3 things that you always do to prepare for an audition?
Well, that's a great question. Well, only because I haven't done an audition in a while. So
Mm-hmm.
let me kind of spin it this way.
Okay.
How about if this is maybe how I would prepare for a performance? And if you want to think of it as an audition as a performance, which it really is,
Mm-hmm.
so this is what I do.
Okay.
For me, I think one of the most important things in my preparation is that I try to never play it wrong.
Ooh.
I try. Now that's the operative word.
Okay.
I try to never play it wrong
Mm-hmm.
because there's this, the way our mind works is that if we are playing music and we make a mistake and we make a digital mistake with our fingers, there's a part of our brain that automatically knows we weren't supposed to do that, but the muscle memory part of our brain thinks that absolutely feels just fabulous and they're going to hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I play something correct 19 times out of 20, when I get to the concert, I've probably got a pretty good chance of getting it right. You
Mm-hmm.
know, On the other hand, if I'm sloppy or non-attentive in my preparation, then that's going to come back to haunt me. Irv Kaufman, who was a cellist and guitarist with the Pittsburgh Symphony for years and taught at IUP in an office right next door to mine, would often say that, and I don't know whether this is his line or he got it from someone, but, we shouldn't practice until we get it right. We should practice until we can't get it wrong.
Yes.
And so for me, if I'm working on something really tricky, and I feel like I just can't, there's no way that I can get it wrong, then I would say then I feel good about that. So that's one of the things that I do in my preparation, is that I try just to be sure that, I leave no stone unturned with that. I try to, especially, I sometimes tell my students, I wish you could hear how slow I practice. I practice very, very, very slow sometimes. Painfully slow, because of the idiosyncrasies of my instrument. So slow preparation, I think that's one thing. Another thing is to practice musically. And what I mean by that is that I don't separate preparation into technical preparation and then musical preparation. So in other words, I'm not trying to just get my fingers on the right spot and then I add the nuance. That should kind of be streamlined into the process. So when you're practicing, I sometimes liken it to like cross training for so like if you're a triathlete, if you're like a marathon runner, and you may do swimming and you may do bicycling as part of the training for the marathon. You're not doing those events, but they help you. So I kind of think about doing musical cross training. So when I'm practicing something at a slow tempo, I'm trying to play with my best sound. I'm trying to play with my best pitch. If there's musical inflection, I try to put that in. Am I successful with that 100% of the time? No. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, but I tried as best I can to make that part of the preparation so that I'm streamlining everything. So I'm not just lining up the digital technique in my fingers, but what I'm trying to do is also impart the musical inflection. So that's another thing that I try to do, is I try to make sure that all of the fundamentals of what I'm doing are present at the earliest point in the preparation. And then thirdly, just to listen. Listening especially is good for tempi. Yes. I find. I think about, and I'll use as an example, earlier this year, I was playing the Francis Poulenc Sinfonietta, which is, if you don't know that piece, it's absolutely fascinating. It's for chamber orchestra. And I listened to several performances, and the tempi were all over the map, even though Poulenc had written it in. So it's like, and I'm glad I did that, because it did help my preparation in terms of what to expect. Yeah. So if you can listen to quite a few performances, I think it's important to keep listening. Listening is such a vital part of what we do.
Yeah, 100%. I love how we went back to listening. Everything comes back to listening. I think as well, when you were talking about just practicing, like how you would perform, practicing as best you can in terms of that, I think that is a great way to practice, especially coming up for a performance or an audition. I remember I recently did a competition, and literally the whole week before, what I would do is I put on a song, I dance to the song to get my heart rate up, and then I just perform the pieces. And yeah, and what that did, I realized I was I was thinking about, my auditioning before as a way of okay, in the practice room it sounds great. In the audition room, it's gonna sound not as great because I'm nervous, and that's fine. But when I did this exercise and I got my nerves up, I got my heart rate up, And then I practiced it. I was like, well, this is where it is, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter, but in terms of this audition, it doesn't really matter where it is when I'm chill, when I'm calm, when I'm not stressed. This is where it is when my heart rate is up. So how do I get it better when my heart rate is up? And I think that completely shifted the way I did that audition for the better. So when you were talking about just practicing how you're going to perform and practicing to the best you can, I couldn't help but think about that experience, because that's, really important. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, and there's a mindfulness component to it as well. In fact, there are several really wonderful books about mindfulness out there, and they're kind of where it's that type of just kind of being aware of your surroundings and kind of aware how we process data when we play can also really be great. There are two books that immediately come to mind, and you already may be aware of one or both of them. And one of them is called "A Soprano on Her Head" by Eloise Ristad, and then another one is "The Inner Game of Music" by Barry Green. And those are wonderful books that talk about kind of like the mental part of what we do.
Yeah.
Again, my dear teacher Gene Corcoran would always tell us as performers that you cannot evaluate and participate at the same time. And so for me as a performer, then I find that especially if I have something really difficult that I have to play, me being mindful of something that contributes to the musical process is often very helpful. As an example, as wind players, for the most part, trombone's kind of the exception to this, but as wind players, we create the rhythm in our instruments and our fingers. And we actually have total control over that. So for me, when I'm very mindful of how I am programming rhythms from my fingers to the instrument, am I keeping rhythms at the knuckle? And am I doing that? That I found has been an incredible benefit to me. In many ways, because it shows that I do have direct control over this process. Sometimes we feel when we perform that we wish we had control over more of the elements. And that is one thing we try to do in our preparation. But just to have that mindset that we are in direct control of how fast or how slow we play.
Yeah.
Or if I'm concerned about my sound, I will put sometimes all of my awareness into breath support. Am I muscularly supporting my sound? But so that I have some type of a focal point that takes me so that I'm not listening to the noise that's in between my ears.
Yeah, interesting. As well, at least for me, what I feel like how I sound versus how I actually sound, there is a bit of a difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, really honing into how I play. All right, that was some really, really, really insightful stuff. I swear this conversation is a gold mine. Even recording it, I knew I was so excited to share it with you. Seriously, it is so good. So if you want to check out that episode, it is in the show notes. That's about it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, all of the things to do with this episode will be in the show notes, from the link to the blog post for this episode and also to the whole conversation with Dr. Worzbyt. Do yourself a favor and check out these show notes, because let's be honest, there's some good stuff in there. And if you want to show your love and support for the Confident Musicianing Podcast, make sure you give it a follow, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye!